Welcome in, everybody. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes to get logged in, but thank you for joining us today. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Looks like everyone is getting logged on. I hope no one is having trouble getting logged on, but we'll go ahead and get started here in about 1 minute. Alrighty, I'm sure we'll have a few stragglers join us, but I want to go ahead and get started since you all have taken time out of your day to join us today. So good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is a ELD compliance webinar series. Today we're focusing on the new hours of service changes, but specifically the split sleeper berth and everything you need to know about those rule changes. My name is Kristen. I'm the Director of Marketing for My20, based out of our US headquarters in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'll be your host for this afternoon's webinar. And joining us today is Ken Evans. He is our CEO of Konexial. He splits his time between our Knoxville office and our Wichita, Kansas office. So thank you, Ken, for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Kristen. Thanks for having me today.
We would like for today's webinar to be very informal and interactive, but to respect everyone's time, we will be following this agenda here. So we just did some brief introductions. We'll then go over the FMCSA ELD mandate timeline. Everyone probably knows all those dates, but we'll just cover that just to cover all of our bases. We will also go over the most recent rule changes to the FMCSA ELD mandate. And then we're going to look at the split sleeper berth changes. There have been a lot of questions, and we've gotten a lot of questions as a company on how the split sleeper berth works now that those new changes have been implemented. After we go through our session, we will have a quick 10 to 15 minute Q&A at the end of our presentation. If you have questions as we go throughout today's webinar, please type those into the Q&A box. You should see a little icon in the middle of your Zoom screen that says Q&A. Type your questions in there as you think of them, and we'll go over those at the end of the session. We are recording today's webinar, so if you want to revisit the information that we talk about today, you'll have the opportunity to do so, and we will send out this link in an email following today's session. You can also reach out to our support team or our sales team to schedule a more personalized informational session if you have specific questions that relate to your business needs. Again, thank you all for joining us. Ken, let's go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. So just a real quick recap of ELD rules. Basically, we've been through a 4-year phased implementation. Original rules in 2015. Everyone had to become electronic by 2017, and by December of 19, everyone had to be up to the ELD standard. If we fast forward into this year, 2020, it's been a really interesting year with a lot of change. But in May 2020, the amended hours of service rules were announced for implementation September 29. So a couple things to remember. When ELDs went in, it really was not any change to the actual hours of service rules. It was only to the technologies that captured compliance. Now we're in the phase where the rules actually have changed. And so we're now basically a month post that implementation of those new rules. And we're going to quickly go over what some of those rules are, and then we're going to go in depth on the split sleeper berth provision. So if you go ahead and move to the next slide. So what changed September 29? September 29, 30-minute break requirement. Prior to the change, drivers were basically required to stop and take a 30-minute break after eight hours after first coming on duty or driving for the day. And it had to be the rest had to be in either a sleeper or an off-duty status. The change has gone in on the 29th. Now the break gets triggered after 8 cumulative hours of driving. So that's not 8 hours from when you started, it's 8 hours of actual driving accumulated. And the break can actually be satisfied by 30 consecutive minutes in any non-driving status, including the on-duty status. So that's giving more flexibility to carriers and drivers. I'm going to skip split sleeper because that's what we're going to spend most of our time on. We'll go into it in a minute. Adverse conditions. You've always had the ability to extend the day, the duty day, or extend the driving time for up to 2 hours if you encounter adverse conditions which could not have been known before dispatch or leaving on the trip. What has changed is now, in addition to getting additional driving time onto the drive limit, you're actually getting at the same time additional hours of service onto the duty day. So before, you could have gone up to 13 hours of driving time. Now you actually can go up to an additional 2 hours from 14 to 16 on the duty day to match that. Short haul exemption. We'll do another webinar in the near future on short haul, but basically what's changing there is short haul is getting the same length of duty day as an over the road driver, going from 12 to 14, and the radius from home base that short haul can be exempted increases from 100 to 150 miles, and those are air miles. So let's dive into what we all came here for, which is understanding more in depth the split sleeper berth provision. So a couple of things before we get into the details. The split sleeper berth has always been a provision in the rules, which gives carriers and drivers the flexibility to get an equivalent 10-hour rest period in 2 different segments. So the intent is always for the driver to have 10 hours of rest time, and this provided some flexibility in getting that time. So before the rule changed, the split was limited to you could have 2 segments, one of a minimum 2 hours and the other a minimum 8 hours to get your equivalent 10 hours of rest. So let's talk a little bit about what is changing. So a couple of key things are changing from a flexibility standpoint. Before, when you use split sleeper berth, your hours of service clock would not pause when you entered the sleeper berth. If you went ahead and did your first segment and then completed your second segment, you could recalculate your hours of service back to the end of the first segment. But actually, while you were in the sleeper berth, there was no pausing the clock. That 14-hour clock continued to run, which led to a lot of feedback to the FMCSA that, hey, this isn't flexible enough. I'm, quote, burning my day here to get a rest period. So with the changes that have been made September 29, FMCSA said, okay, if you're doing a split sleeper berth, the time you're spending in either one of those 2 segments will actually pause the HOS clock, the 14-hour duty day clock. Now, the requirements have been rewritten as well. So before it said you needed a minimum 2 and a minimum 8 combined to get a minimum 10 to use the provision. The provision's been rewritten to say, okay, you have to have a short segment and a long segment. The short segment is a minimum 2-hour segment, and any combination of consecutive off-duty and sleep time in the sleeper berth can fulfill that 2-hour requirement. The long segment has been rewritten to say instead of an 8-hour minimum, now it's only a 7-hour minimum, but it has to be sleeper only for the long segment. So you have to be in the sleeper berth for the regulation to work. Now that you say minimum 2, minimum 7, well, that's only 9 hours. Well, they still have a requirement that you get the 10-hour equivalent. So neither segment can be shorter than the minimums, but they have to add up to 10 hours or more to get the equivalent rest period. So basically, FMCSA is granting more flexibility, saying you can do a 3 and 7 split, you can do a 2 and 8 split, or you can do anything on that continuum between them. The order in which you take the sleep or the rest is flexible. You should be able to take either the short segment first or the long segment. What is required, though, is that you have to complete the split process before your duty day expires, before your 14-hour clock expires. If you don't complete the second part of the split, basically those hours from the first split are going to count against your duty day and could possibly throw you into a violation situation. So we don't want that. So let's go on to the next slide, Kristen. So I made an example here to show you how the two scenarios can work. Let's take a driver. Let's say that I'm driving today and I have 5 hours remaining on my HOS clock. So I've been on duty or driving starting 9 hours ago. I have 4 hours of my 11 remaining on the drive clock. So I've got some time left, but not a full day, right? If I have a driver that wants to take a rest, feels like he needs a rest, he can enter the split number 1. So to do that, he would go off duty and or sleeper for a minimum of 2 hours. So in this example, my driver went off duty for 10 minutes. He may have gone into a store, done something personal, and he decides to come back and take a nap. So in this case, he went off duty for 10 minutes. He entered the sleeper berth for 2 hours and 20 minutes. So he actually put in a total of 2 hours and 30 minutes of consecutive rest time in the split sleeper number 1 option. The second thing, so if we look at the impact of that, when he exits that 2 hour and 30 minute period, the HOS and the drive clocks are going to have been frozen and remain exactly where they were. Okay. When he exits the first split, which is the short split in this case, those clocks are going to resume. Okay. And so he has 5 hours left, 4 hours of driving that can be accomplished in 5 hours of HOS time. So the requirement then is that he has to complete the other split, the second split, before the HOS clock expires. Okay. So if he completes that split, well, let's talk about if you don't complete the split. That's the area that we're worried about from compliance standpoint. If he does not complete a minimum, in this case, it would be 7.5 hours because he did 2.5. He needs another 7.5 to get his 10 equivalent. So if he doesn't complete that before the HOS clock runs out, the time that was paused during the first split is going to get added back to his duty clocks. And it could create, again, a violation condition. But if he actually completes and does what he's supposed to, completes the second split and does 7 hours and 30 minutes, the long segment, all in sleeper berth, then his hours of service are going to recalculate to the end of the first split. So when he came out of the first split, he would have had 14 hours of duty day, HOS clock, and 11 hours of drive time. So the important things to remember here, a couple of things. The short segment can be any combination of off-duty and sleeper as long as it's connected together, okay? But it has to be resting time. The long segment has to be in the sleeper berth. And you can do those splits in either order that you prefer to do them in. So they're giving you additional flexibility. Assuming that you execute the splits correctly, your HOS clock stays paused in both splits, and you get the benefit of that flexibility. So what it really does is it helps you, if you need to extend your duty day. Okay, let's go on to a second example. So in the second example here, I left the numbers the same to keep it somewhat familiar. So again, I've got 5 hours left on my duty day and 4 hours of driving time left. I can enter the first split. And in this case, let's say I'm really tired. I really need to get a night's sleep. So I go into the long segment and I sleep for 7 hours and 15 minutes. So I've exceeded the 7-hour minimum. The second thing is that while I'm in there, the clocks are paused. When I come out, either in driving or on duty, the clocks are going to resume, right? So I've completed the first of the two splits, but in this case, the long split was first. So I exit, clocks resume, the day has been extended. I must complete the 10-hour equivalent rest before my HOS clocks run out, even though they've been paused while I was in there. Again, failure to complete that second split that's required is going to add that time back to my records. But in this case, I need to complete 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that's 10 minus the 7:15 that I did in the long segment. And assuming I complete that before the end of the duty day, my clocks are going to pause when I'm in the second split. And then once I've completed the second split, I'll get the whole day recalculated to the end of split one. So that gives you a couple of real world examples of how time is actually used. And these provisions, if used correctly, do extend the amount of time a driver can have in the day and give additional flexibility to the carrier to keep the driver compliant. So let's go forward, Kristen. Next, I put together a couple of questions that I think any fleet manager or owner, anybody who's working with drivers, needs to ask themselves. So does your current solution automatically detect sleeper berth splits and freeze the clocks appropriately? In other words, do they handle the rules correctly? And is it intuitive and easy? The driver shouldn't have to remember to set switches. The software, if done correctly, should do it help them to execute the splits appropriately. Is your driver application that's being used simple, intuitive, and helpful to drivers? Because these guys have a lot on their plates, as you guys know, a lot of responsibility. And the last thing you want is a piece of software making their lives more difficult. So are we making it easy and intuitive for the driver? Third question, can your current solution correctly apply off-duty and sleeper on the short sleeper segment? In the case of the My20 solution that we're here talking about today, we automatically detect any time there's 120 consecutive minutes of off-duty and sleeper time combined. There has to be at least 1 minute in that segment so that we can tell it was supposed to be a sleeper segment, but we will automatically detect, and it doesn't matter if the off-duty comes first or the sleeper comes first in that combined segment, the short segment. Last question, does your current solution provider provide clear and helpful messages to the driver to help with his or her compliance? One thing about this solution is as you're exiting sleeper provisions, you're going to get a message that says you've completed the short segment of X amount of time. You need to take Y amount of time for the long segment before your HOS clock runs out, and vice versa. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to ask you to take a look at some questions again on solutions. So you're going to hear a lot about edge computing, especially from us over the next year or two. It's a really important concept. So these are some questions you need to be asking yourself about your technology provider. Will your current system and solution work with 5G? And that's a key question as 5G is now being deployed on a national basis, and all the networks are available. The new iPhones are out that support 5G. Does your technology take advantage of that? If you have a technology like the My20 system, the answer to that is yes, it does. Secondly, okay, let's go backwards from 5G. Is my current system 4G or LTE capable? And that's really going to get a lot more important in the next year. Because if you're not 4G or LTE capable, the next question is your system ready for the 3G network shutdown? So Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile are all decommissioning their spectrums for the 3G network. So if your telematics technology, your fleet management, your ELD has some age on it, there's a really high likelihood that it is not 4G or LTE capable. And when you're making that transition, you should pick a solution provider that not only is 4G LTE foundational, but also can very easily take advantage of the 5G network. Next question. So how does your current solution work when the driver is out of coverage? We all know there are areas in the country where you can't get a cell phone signal. Some of them surprise me to this day, places I can't get a cell phone signal. Does your solution allow the driver to operate the software and handle everything and sync it up when he comes back into coverage? And finally, does your current provider have the industry's best customer service? We pride ourselves on our service and helping drivers make technology useful in their lives and to do their jobs and keep compliant. And I would encourage you guys to check ELDratings.com to get actual reviews by real users, real drivers. So those are the things that I prepared to walk you guys through, guys and gals. Kristen, do we have any questions from the attendees?
I do believe we have a couple of questions, and as I read through the questions that have already come in, if you have questions for Ken about everything that he's been talking about with Split Sleeper, please type those into the Q&A box right now. But let's see here. Okay. Was there anything that I needed to do to have the new hours of service rules ready to go? I'm not sure that this person says they're not sure that their ELD's capable with the new rule set.
Right. So the answer is yes. I don't care who you were using for ELD or fleet management. They would have had to issue a software upgrade for whatever device you're using, either a compute device in the cab or an application on your phone. But yes, for these rules for you to get the benefit of these rules, you're going to have someone who's actually done the work to program them correctly. So yes, if you didn't get an update from your provider, more than likely these rules are not in place. Now for the My20 users out there, our customers didn't have anything to do because the rules, they had all the software they needed a week before the changes. Okay.
You mentioned edge computing. Can you explain a little bit more on what that actually means and how it would affect my fleet? That's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So edge computing, again, is a really important concept. In today's world, most of the telematics providers that we're competing against, they have a model where they're acquiring data in the truck. They're sending that data to a cloud server. It's doing a bunch of work in the cloud, and then it's sending an answer back to the driver. Okay, so that is a typical cloud computing model. The difference is in edge computing, all of the acquisition of data, processing of data, and decision-making actually happens where the data is acquired. So if you think about it, if I'm running a fleet of 100 trucks, every truck becomes its own little edge computing module because every driver has basically a supercomputer now in his pocket in the form of an iPhone. And basically, the system becomes much more reliable much faster, lower latency times. You can do a lot more to help the driver when the computing is actually done in the cab. So edge computing has advantages from a reliability standpoint. You don't have to worry about network coverage because all the computing is being done in the cab and it just syncs up when the network is available. And it allows you to do lots of really cool stuff to actually give the driver real-time alerting and feedback based on what's happening live with the truck. So those are the advantages for edge computing.
Wonderful. Our next question came in. My current provider kept giving me violations that didn't line up with my actual time clock. How does the My20 solution handle violations, and why was my solution giving me a violation?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the earlier question of, do I need something for my current system to work with the new rules? And the answer is yes, you had to have a software update to get the new rules. And I have read and been contacted by some of the journalists in Overdrive talking about how we handled programming this new flexibility because certain providers did not provide the right programming. So they made you do things like, do the long segment first, or not be able to detect off-duty and sleeper together. So the reason that you would have been getting those violations, even though the rules had changed, is your provider did not update your software. And until that happens, you're going to continue to get those violations.
Does anyone else have any other questions today? We'll keep going, and if you do, please type them in and we'll stop and answer. But just as a reminder, the My20 app is available in your Apple store or on your Android devices. And like we have mentioned multiple times, the new rule sets are active and live in the My20 app.
I would just remind everybody that if you're interested in talking to us about the My20 edge computing technology, if you're looking to upgrade and be ready for 3G to go away, give us a call. If you think we've done a good job supporting you guys with the changes and educating you, please tell some folks about us. That really helps us more than you could possibly know. And we're here, this company's built to serve you, okay? You as a manager, as an owner, or as a driver, that's all our passion is to make technology superb and easy for you to use.
Absolutely. And we'll just wrap up today's session by just saying thank you all for joining us, and thank you for what you do, not just for joining us today, but for what you do every day and supplying freight across the country. It's so appreciated to the families of our company and our communities, and we really appreciate everything that you all do. If you have any more questions or need more support, you can look us up online at konexial.com/training, or call us at 865-888-MY20, that's 6920, and email us at support@konexial.com. We would love to talk to you again soon about our edge computing fleet management solution. So if you all have any questions, please give us a call. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.